So hello everyone. I'm Vivo Fam, Alight's global activator, and I'm so excited to have you here today for our first Alight Global Perspectives webinar on climate justice, displacement, and action in 2024. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded, so no worries if you need to step away from your screen for a minute. We'll be sharing the recording and all resources covered following the webinar. Really quickly, I wanted to share what you can expect during today's session. First off, Alight's CEO, Jocelyn Wyatt, will provide a quick overview of Alight in case anyone is new here to the Alight community, and she'll then introduce you all to today's topic and our wonderful speakers. We'll then dive into the panel discussion portion of the webinar, which will be followed by a Q&A. And lastly, we'll close things out by sharing how you can stay tuned and what to expect following the webinar. Now, I am delighted to pass things off to Jocelyn.
Great. Thank you so much, V, and thank you to all of you for joining us today. And thank you so much to our speakers for agreeing to participate in today's webinar and to help inform all of us about this critical issue of climate displacement. So first, just a quick introduction to Alight. Alight is a nonprofit organization that our purpose is really to build a meaningful life for and with the displaced. We work with refugees and internally displaced people around the world in about 20 countries each year, serving between 3 and 4 million people. And what we're really focused on is not just about delivering to those basic needs, although we certainly do that through providing healthcare services and water and sanitation and gender-based violence protection and livelihoods and education, but we really work with the displaced communities to really help them find and rebuild a life filled with joy, connection, and purpose. So our strategy at Alight is really to co-create with communities. So we integrate human-centered design into our work. We've done this for over a decade. Prior to myself joining Alight as CEO about 2 years ago, I was the co-founder and CEO of IDEO.org, a global social impact design and innovation organization. Alight and IDEO.org were longtime partners, and through that time, really got very good at practicing human-centered design and developing these practices of co-creation, which we use around the world. So today, Alight's 2,500 humanitarians, our staff in these 20 countries, really work to deeply understand the experiences of the displaced through the lenses of empathy. And we're committed to delivering services worthy of their humanity. So we work with institutional partners like USAID and UNHCR and others to provide services to refugees and displaced people in the context of settlements or camps or urban areas where they're living today. So climate displacement has actually been work that Alight has done for many decades, though it wasn't until more recently that we started framing it in that way. We know that we're experiencing, in terms of the humanitarian crisis, the highest level of movements on records today. 1 in every 73 humans has been displaced, which adds up to more than 110 million people worldwide that have been forcibly displaced as a result of persecution, conflict, violence, and in some cases, climate change. Though many believe that this number of 110 million doesn't adequately capture the number of climate displaced people that we're seeing in the world today. So at Alight, we, of course, work to address those that have been displaced by conflict, and so many of the UN and government funding mechanisms and protections have been in place due to those who have experienced persecution or conflict displacement. Climate displacement is a more recent topic, though, that governments and the UN system and other humanitarian organizations like Alight are really working to grapple with and address, because we recognize that climate change is continuing to accelerate, and that over the coming years and decades, we're going to see more and more people that are displaced either within their own countries or across borders due to climate emergencies. Things like floods or droughts, or wildfires or others. And so these climate emergencies, we see them happening across the United States. The California or the Maui wildfires are recent examples. We also see them happening all over the world. Alight currently is responding to climate emergencies in the Horn of Africa and Somalia, and Kenya and Ethiopia, which have experienced years of drought and massive food insecurity. We've responded to climate emergencies in Pakistan, where a third of the country was underwater. And we're currently working in the Philippines, setting up systems so that health systems can continue to function when there are massive storms and typhoons and floods throughout that country as well. And so with Alight's work on climate displacement, we're both working to help ensure that people can stay where they are at home and have that resilience to not have to leave when those climate emergencies happen, if that's possible. We work to protect people on those journeys of displacement when they do have to leave home and go someplace else, ensuring that they are safe and protected along the way, with a particular focus on women and girls who are exceptionally vulnerable in these situations. And then we work with families to help them rebuild lives, to find new livelihood opportunities, ensure that kids can get back in school, ensure that women can have adequate health care that they need as they rebuild their lives in a new environment. And so today, today's session is what we're calling an Alight Global Perspective. This is a first in a series that we are launching, and we're really aiming to bring attention to the myriad of challenges faced by displaced individuals. So climate displacement is certainly a big one. We'll be doing another one focused on women and girls and the connection of displacement to women and girls and how that affects them. If there are other topics that folks would like us to cover, please feel free to share them in the chat. We are really eager to make this a learning opportunity both for Alight's team worldwide. You'll see many of my colleagues on this webinar today, which I'm delighted to welcome all of you. And then this is also an opportunity for us to bring together our supporters and friends and folks who may be new to Alight to help get informed about some of these topics that we're all tackling. So today's webinar is Climate Justice, Displacement, and Action in 2024. And I'm thrilled to be able to introduce you to our speakers. We have Jacqueline Masitua, who is a Senior Climate Finance Advisor for the U.S. Agency for International Development. Jacqueline actually served on the board of IDEO.org when I was CEO, and so that is how we got to know each other, and so I'm delighted to work with her again in this context. David Kamowitz is the Chief Program Officer of Tenure Facility, joining us very early today on the West Coast this week. So thank you, David, for that. We got to know David's organization, Tenure Facility, last year through the Audacious Prize and through the School World Forum, and we're able to connect with some of his colleagues last fall, and we're really inspired by their work. And then Yami Degna is a climate justice leader, recently was at Open Society Foundation, where we connected with her there, and we're just really impressed with her work around sort of getting this worldwide movement around climate justice to accelerate. So thank you all for joining us, and I will start by just asking you to make a quick introduction to yourself and your connection to this topic of climate displacement. So Jacqueline, we'll start with you.
Thanks so much, Jocelyn, and thanks for the team for getting this session together. As Jocelyn mentioned, I'm the Senior Climate Finance Advisor at USAID, and my portfolio entails our big goal of mobilizing 150 billion of public and private climate finance by 2030. And when looking at the financing challenge, we do consider other aspects of USAID's wider work. So our collaboration with our colleagues in the Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs and the constituents that they're supporting, our colleagues in global health as new and different global health challenges emerge, and also our colleagues within kind of the adaptation space and really responding to calls from our partner countries of support for the need for adaptation, as well as job creation. So that's where I come into this conversation.
Great, thanks. David.
Yeah, as Jocelyn said, my name is David Kamewitz, and I'm the Chief Program Officer at the 10-year facility. And what the 10-year facility does is it tries to channel significant amounts of funding to organizations that are grassroots organizations of indigenous peoples, of forest communities, community organizations. Really, our main link to the displacement issue is to help people be able to not be displaced, to defend their territories, to be able to manage their resources in such a way that they can adapt to climate change, both climate change that comes from outside, from global climate change, and also regional and local climate changes, because I think often we don't have a real sense that there are very important processes going on in terms of local and regional climate change that's as influenced by land use and other factors as the global climate change that we're all facing.
Great, thank you. Yamid.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. Up until a couple of weeks ago, I was indeed the Climate Justice Global Director at the Open Society Foundation. And there, I've been fostering resilient and low carbon transitions for more just societies. I think what I've done over the past 2 years was very much increasing the awareness and mobilizing more philanthropy to work and to support efforts on adaptation and loss and damage. And we did, as OSF, supported most of our program centered around climate finance and climate adaptation and loss and damage, which helped also secure the outcome that we've seen at COP27 and COP28 on loss and damage. But what gets me also so dear, why this issue is so dear to me, I am also an islander. And what I've seen over the past few years is how adaptation, the spectrum of adaptation and loss and damage goes intrinsically together. And I'm looking forward to the conversation. Prior to OSF, I was also a negotiator on transparency issues for the UK. I've been advising least developed countries, and also working for a think tank on the implementation and the design of the Paris Agreement.
Great, thank you so much. So our opening question at Alight, we are very focused on our customer being the displaced person and really having deep insights and understanding their needs. And so really want to start with that aspect. And as we see climate change accelerating, we see it taking place all over the world. It seems that no corner of the earth is untouched by this at this point. But would love for each of you to just sort of share some reflections around, what do you perceive as the primary challenges faced by displaced individuals when they experience those climate disasters or climate emergencies? And how do you envision these challenges evolving in the future, and how can we meet these challenges or address them? So Jacqueline, I know it's a big question, but we'll start with you, and just would love to hear some of your reflections around, what are we seeing and how's that going to shift over time?
So I'll start by some of the challenges and then share some of what we're trying to do at USAID. I think one of the main challenges kind of at a higher level is kind of the lack of clarity. And by that, I mean an understanding and kind of how to best apply existing legal frameworks to the current challenge related to climate displaced people. So we have legal frameworks for refugees. That set of frameworks is still in question and is really being tested by the addition of climate refugees. And as an international community, we just haven't really figured out clarity on kind of how best to categorize, which subsequently means responsibility for these people. The second challenge I see is really around financing, so money, getting the right funding in a sustained manner, not only to people on the ground to help as they immediately deal with kind of the extreme effects of climate change, but should they move from where they are, really to make sure that there are enough finances as a system to be able to support those movements and also their relocation once they are in different places. From a kind of broader system, I think, being within USG, one of our main constraints is our money is kind of earmarked for certain activities. So then it becomes hard as new challenges arise to really immediately be responsive to some of those challenges in a way that ultimately countries that we work with are asking. And so it's kind of taking a little bit of creativity on our end about how best to support that. The last that I'll say that I see as a challenge is kind of around narrative. And I say that because there are a number of crises going on around the world, and really making sure that all of these crises and people get adequate respect, visibility for what they are experiencing, so that we as an international community can understand what they're going through and take the appropriate measures where we are, I think is also kind of a need. From a USAID perspective, I mean, we are involved across the spectrum of development. So a lot of kind of the work that, my colleagues in the Bureau of Humanitarian Affairs are working on are kind of immediate challenges on the ground related to kind of large scale conflict and displacement. We also have a team working on stabilization, and then I'm kind of on the development angle. So once a country has come kind of full circle on stability, really dedicating the resources that we have to building systems and ecosystems to make sure that people can grow and thrive and be healthy within the communities and countries where they come from. It is obviously a challenge. And I think, last year being the hottest year on record, a lot of the kind of questions, demands, signals that we're getting from partner governments is, one, how can we make better use of predictive technologies to better understand what is coming ahead so that we can also plan and prepare with our people locally? Two, how can we rebuild infrastructure to be more resilient to a lot of the climate challenges that are being experienced? Three, how can we get access to finance that is easier for us to get, easier for us to apply, but also that doesn't necessarily challenge our debt sustainability, which for a lot of the countries that we're working with, for instance, across the African continent, that macroeconomic aspect of kind of, debt sustainability is a challenge. Because we cover such a wide range of countries, it's really hard to generalize. But I think what is coming up more and more is kind of this ask from countries around the world of saying, don't divorce climate from development. Climate and development are one and the same thing. And as you look at the ecosystem and as you look at the different challenges, we as a development community need to do a better job of working in a more systemic fashion than we sometimes have in the past. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Really helpful. David, over to you. Same question.
I guess one way I would think about it is our work at the 10-year facility is fundamentally related to people's defense of their territories. And that may sound like it doesn't have to do with displacement, but it's very related to displacement, because the reason people defend their territories is because they're grounded in their territories. That's where they grew up. That's where their grandparents are buried. That's where they know everyone. That's where they know how the forest works. That's where they know how to survive. That's where the culture is based in. The words and languages come from the surroundings around them. The things that they do spiritually are based on the location. we people who are living in urban areas and used to kind of running around the world like a lot of us lose track of the fact that most rural people are totally grounded in a location. And the idea of actually being out of that location, whether it be by climate situations or by conflict, and climate and conflict are often closely related. They're not two separate things. I mean, all we see right now in the Sahel in terms of the relation between farmers and pastoralists and what's going on in Burkina or Mali or conflict, climate, but it's forcing people out of not just their jobs and their location, but their cultures, their traditions, their ancestors, their history. Um, and that's something that needs to be sustained and often can be sustained through organizations of the people themselves. I mean, you have diaspora in many parts of the world that are so heavily connected still to the territories of their origin because of the meaning of those territories to them, because of the meaning of their relatives to them, their clans to them. And so it's really, I mean, I think on this whole climate justice thing, we have to get back to the idea that these are communities and peoples with histories, with families, with lives. And justice is about their ability to maintain that and to push that. It's not there are a bunch of victims out there that have been kind of forced into becoming invisible or nameless. And the names that they do have are totally associated with locations. The location, they name the locations and the locations name them. So in thinking about the challenges, for me, that's very key. And the other thing that's key is that a lot of the people that we're working with, they're being displaced not by climate, often by climate, but also by groups that are the groups that are responsible for causing climate change, whether it be the mining, the oil drilling, the oil palm plantations that are pushing people out for activities that are actually doing huge damage to the planet and making this whole problem much worse. So those are some of the reflections that I guess I would have on this topic.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate that perspective. And yeah, I think that really resonates. And I think really understanding people's connection to their homelands, their ancestral lands, the places they're from is so critical, and why it is so important that, you know, that even if we provided those protections or money or whatever it is, like there's a deeper sort of emotional and felt connection to the
And
places that
spiritual.
people are from. Yeah, absolutely. Yamid, over to you.
Well, difficult to come after David and Jacqueline. I just would like first to echo what they said. To avoid repeating some of their points, which I totally agree with, I wanted to come back and to highlight one statistics brought by Zurich Insurance magazine. And they are, I think this came late January this year, and they predict 1.2 billion climate refugees by 2050. And the reason why I wanted to highlight that is because the fact that it comes from insurance companies should not be taken lightly. What we've seen indeed is due to extreme weather, rising temperature, damage ecosystems, more business sectors like tourism, logistics, like the Panama Canal, are getting more vulnerable, and with bankruptcy, more farmers see their livelihoods threatened, and more lives are being lost, and sometimes silently, like hit. Um, the result is more properties or business are getting more non-insurable, and this is exacerbating the vicious circle for the most marginalized, and that means also less protection for the most marginalized and the most vulnerable communities and also countries. And I think that also exacerbates that vicious circle that Jacqueline alluded to on indebtedness for also the most vulnerable countries. At the same time, what we also see is the more existential dimension where you do have at our nation, for example, seeking the right to stay and therefore to adapt and to stay in their land, while also contemplating, their land going underwater, condemned to go underwater, and what would happen with their statehood and how they need to reimagine what their democracy, would be, and how to also handle the non-economic losses of climate change, which would be cultural heritage. And there have been a lot of um, news recently about the atoll nation of Tuvalu seeking some deals with Australia. If their nation would need, and it's a country of 12,000 inhabitants, would need to leave their country, um, and whether they are going to be dispatched in different places or together, what does it mean to keep their cultures alive? And also, there's a push within the UN to actually protect their statehood and to make sure that they maintain their membership, also prevailing from an economic point of view that although they are small island states, they are also big ocean states. So you could already see, some narrative, and I think also Jacqueline mentioned that narrative shift that would be needed about how we perceive what's small, what's big, and also the dynamics involved into the migration flux coming up. And something that David alluded to, because of the push for mining, what we see with the dash to renewables is also that push for mining of critical minerals, and we also hear about the push for seabed mining as well. So, what does it mean again for from an economic, social, geostrategic point of view for those island states? So I just wanted to highlight, that dimension that brings some of the issues that both Jacqueline and David alluded to, the right to stay, the legal framework for protection, how to uh, and how to adapt and still face some of the unavoidable trends. The challenges of mobilizing enough funding is real, and we've seen that coming up in the negotiation of the loss and damage fund. Where how to be creative in terms of the source of money, knowing that we cannot just rely on public finances. Shall we look at finances from different sectors, aviation, maritime, but also, the really implement the polluters pay principles even more on some industries in particular, and also on countries. So these are questions that are real, but there's also this technological breakthrough and indigenous knowledge, how to really create, as Jacqueline said, those more preventive and not just curative processes. And that links to governance. And I wanted to insist there's how to create the right international, regional, national, and local governance to facilitate the mobilization and access of finance, but also the human response and the technology to face that. I think we need to double down on planning, and I think the role of cities is going to be also more important, especially from a narrative point of view. We need to get down also to people and how we really connect to what it means for people also at a more local level. And I will stop there for now.
Great, thank you so much. I really appreciate those. Those were great overviews from all of you in terms of what we're seeing and what some of the impacts are on displaced communities. So back to you, Jacqueline. Would just love to if we put a frame of equity on this, and I think Yamid started with this, certainly as we think about the sort of disproportionate impacts on island states, disproportionate impacts on women and children, on the most vulnerable, would love to just hear, some of your reflections on like, how do we as a global community really work to ensure or uphold our values connected to equity as we're serving climate displaced, and ensure that we really are addressing the needs of the most vulnerable.
So I think it's weirdly simple yet really hard. I think we need to listen better. I think Yamid's example, like highlighting Tuvalu, is really important because here is a state that on the global stage has repeatedly shared the evidence of what they might go through and kind of what the international community could do to support that. But I think besides kind of listening to where countries are, from a USAID perspective, a lot of what we are doing is kind of shifting how we've done development and really kind of focusing on localization. And I think Jocelyn, just taking kind of a pinch from kind of both of our backgrounds with IDEO, is really kind of going back to how do we co-create together a development framework that works. And I think the challenge with development in the past is that it's kind of been outside pushed in. And now realizing that that model doesn't work, I think now it's really working collectively with the communities where we operate to really understand what indigenous knowledge means, understand what they know, how to best incorporate those solutions. Being as big and clunky as we are, part of our localization agenda also is really the shift of power, not only in the decision making through co-creation, but also through financing. Being acutely aware that our structure in the past has been one where we've worked with service providers that are predominantly, based, here in the DC area, as it might be, to really understanding that unless the communities that we work with actually have access to the money and the decision making, a lot of the conversations that we end up having end up being kind of really circular. The localization agenda is also underlaid by our very strong commitment to kind of inclusion and equity at all levels. We've done a lot of work around Indigenous people and really including them, their knowledge, their experiences into development programming, but also being cognizant of the role that women play within the development conversation as well. Working more also with youth and the like. Having said that, I think for a structure like ours, it is big, which means it takes time. And really understanding that we might need to be a little bit patient from a USAID, but where it's critical is working with partners like Alight that are more nimble than we are to really translate the vision we have as US government to really operationalize that for us in the countries we operate with, and really have kind of the face and the values of what we're trying to do, but ultimately engage in a way, engage in languages, and engage with people kind of face to face. And sometimes it's a bit harder from a large bureaucracy. I think the last thing that I'll say, and that we're trying to do, is really kind of work across different aspects of U.S. government, really to try and bring to bear kind of all of the tools, understanding that there's never enough money for all of the challenges we're facing, but knowing that the model that we are using does have different advantages and there are different tools within the toolbox really to operate, I think has been quite important for us. Thanks.
Great, thank you. David, back to you. Would just love to have you share a little bit more about Tenure Facilities work and how does it? Can you just share a little bit, specifically, what are the sort of programs or initiatives of Tenure Facility that really do help people from experiencing that displacement and really help people stay at home?
Mostly, we fund, as I mentioned before, large indigenous peoples and forest community organizations. So in the Amazon basin, in the Congo basin, particular DRC, in South Asia, in Indonesia. These are rural people who have organized themselves, um, usually often in response to groups that are trying to push them out of their land, out of their territory. So very much linked to the question of displacement in that sense. And they are often people who rely heavily on the natural resources that they in the places they live. That can be forests, can be mountain resources. In some cases, it's arid areas in the Sahel. And the challenge is really to convince funders that experience shows that they are the most effective natural managers of the natural resources in their environments. We hear a lot about these organizations don't have capacity. These organizations shouldn't be receiving large amounts of money. The people are corrupt because they didn't put in something for their per diem, or because they did this or they did that. Um, our experience definitely says that the organizations that are good at doing procurement, good at doing policy proposals, good at doing all these other things, aren't that great at actually managing a forest, aren't that great at actually talking to the people in the communities, aren't that great at being trusted by the local officials who have known them all of their lives. And that those are the people who can really move this agenda forward. So our role is to try to find systems that will channel funding to those groups, not $10,000 grants, which is what they've had, but $1 million grants and $1.5 million grants, and to make that work, even with what that means is in Eastern DRC, that $1.5 million has to go by river 3 days up the river in little chunks, with the people who are the people who are going to stop the boat on the way and who have managed those sort of processes, getting the money out to the forest communities is key to this whole process, and giving them the possibility to organize themselves. I always use the example of microcredit because when I've been in this business in a long time, and when I started out in this business, I said poor people couldn't get credit. They couldn't pay back loans. They wouldn't take out loans because they were high interest rates, all these other things. And what they did was that they came up with a system where basically communities managed in one way or another. Social control managed things that used to be done in very expensive financial administration, financial services sort of ways. And this is what we need to do to get resources down to the ground. We think the USAID localization efforts are hugely important, and not just localization to the countries, but localization to the rural grassroots organizations that are really out there. And there are groups. I mean, in Nepal right now, the Federation of Community Forest Users of Nepal has 300,000 community forest user groups. IDSEP in Peru, in the Peruvian Amazon, um, represents practically all of the communities of the Peruvian Amazon. Aman in Indonesia has 15 million members. So it's not that these are tiny little things, but they get tiny little amounts of money and they're able to do amazing things, very, very small amounts.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Well, I think that's a great lead into, you have been so involved in climate negotiations, bringing many different stakeholders around the table. I think there's been, often critique that we haven't heard indigenous communities or local voices or community-based organizations or refugee-led organizations around those tables to the extent that we should. Tell us about the work that you've done and what you see as possible in terms of doing this more as activities of co-creation, or more inclusive way, or in a way that ensures equity.
Thank you. And I know that, time is going fast. What I would like to see, I would like to give you an example of something that I would recommend to do a little bit more. It's undertaking strategic foresight and scenario exercises that would bring different stakeholders. And I'm saying that because we're living the latest negotiation, COP28, with a number of things to do, and especially out of a global stock take that tells us, to do more and to come up in 2 years' time when we meet again in Belém with more ambitious but just national plans and implementable plans. And we need to make sure that we do that with all stakeholders and all constituencies. And I was very inspired by an exercise I took part last year with different think tanks, health communities, really outside, not just the climate bubble, but a wider group of stakeholders from indigenous youth. And, we were supposed to imagine how to make a city bound to embrace 200,000 climate refugees, a vibrant and prosperous hub in the United States. And by the end of the exercise, we came up with a number of measures that needed to be set up to protect, looking at all the trade-offs, but a number of possibilities. We had also, the private sector, really all constituencies. And the conclusion was that, hey, actually, we need to do it again because we could be even more ambitious. And that was phenomenal because for me, what emerged was already a set of processes, a set of decisions, policy recommendations that I had not heard before, and that coming together would really push the agenda forward. And yet, we felt that we need that iterative process of what is possible. How to picture really something that is, getting better, where there's really creating the win-win. So I think we need to start doing such exercise, and we have that window of 2 years to try to really use also the international momentum to really get that going. The other thing that I would highlight is the resource mobilization and access to finance. Timing matter, and especially at local level. And I think that Jacqueline also alluded to it. I hope that philanthropies like OSF are going to do better. And I'm really happy that over my 2-year tenure at OSF, within that 2 years, we've been able to mobilize more philanthropic organizations to engage on the issue of adaptation and loss and damage, adaptation and resilience. And I think there's a coalition of 20 of them now, that hopefully going to do better, including looking at this issue. And my last point is leveraging the UN resolutions. Again, more work on legal strategies to set procedures, to protect, the most vulnerable, and also not only communities but also countries, that would be facing those displacements. And in any case, the driver is dignity. I think I just wanted to really highlight this word. It's about also both solidarity but also dignity, to really drive this agenda for solutions that works for all.
Thank you. That is really, really important, and certainly something we believe at Alight. We are about to wrap up, and I'm hoping we can just do a rapid fire round of quick questions. We have had a few questions come in, and so I'm just going to go through each of you, but if you could sort of limit your responses to 20 or 30 seconds, that'd be great. Let's start with you. We have a question from our colleague at Alight, Ian. In the Horn of Africa, climate change is real, and the people are really experiencing the hardships of climate crisis, droughts, floods, etc. The number of displaced people are growing. How can we access climate finance or loss and damage funding?
That's going to be, I think there needs to be two things. The loss and damage fund that was created and launched at the COP will take a little bit of time to be accessible because the governance of these funds is yet to be put in place this year. There's parameters that have been agreed upon, but it will take a little bit of time before we get access. And one of the key questions, raised for this fund is how to make sure that communities, get access to this fund and not just government. And I think we still need to work this out. So I really encourage you to engage in that conversation. But there's a few initiatives that would pilot how to, community-based funding on loss and damage. One of them has been launched at the COP, for the Pacific Islands, facing sea level rise. And there needs to be impetus to do also all the regional ones, looking at, the issues that are being faced in the Horn of Africa, for example. So I would say, to really also push regional and local governance system that could really push for the access of funding and not just wait for the loss and damage fund. We need case studies to inform how that can be done more effectively.
Great, thank you. Jacqueline, a question came in for you, which basically highlights Feed the Future as one of USAID's initiatives. Is that the main initiative that is supporting climate displacement, or are there others that we should know about as well?
Thanks for that question, Igor. It is one, and I think we are working with a number of tools together. So I think Feed the Future is relevant, important, not only from the food security component, but also adaptation. Also, from an adaptation perspective, USAID is part of the wider government initiative called Prepare, which, President Biden launched a couple of years ago, which is really a push on the private sector to get more involved in adaptation and resilience. There's much more significantly, almost tenfold investment going to mitigation efforts that are not going to adaptation. And so for us, it was really kind of a push to the private sector to say, put your money into adaptation, especially since at the end of the day, it will affect your operations if you two are not able to adapt. So as of, COP28, we ended up receiving several billions of commitment from corporates around the world, really focused on adaptation efforts, and in particular, kind of the use of technology, predictive technologies, but also corporate commitments to adaptation. I think another area that, we are looking at, several areas. One, from a wider global infrastructure perspective, we do support Treasury in their conversations around multilateral development bank reform. And that is such an important one, just as far as locking multiple billions of dollars over time. We also work closely with the Green Climate Fund, once again, as not only US government as a contributor to the fund, but also USAID working with our missions in different countries, working on project preparation for companies that would like to access the Green Climate Fund and other funds. Unfortunately, there is no quick access to the climate funds. And so, kind of going back to the question on Somalia, what to do now is start to create viable investment options in the countries you are, because the pushback we tend to get is there are no bankable projects in country XYZ. And so for us, it's really to kind of demonstrate to say, look, we as USAID have put money into project prep. Here is a list of viable options. We're no longer going to take the excuse of not having, a sufficient pipeline. The last thing that I'll say is we're definitely experimenting with innovative financial solutions. So part of it is blended finance. How can we put our grant funding towards a capital stack that allows for the private sector to come in? How can we create stronger frameworks around carbon financing, green bonds, and the like? Once again, trying to get larger sums of money into countries and communities that haven't typically had access to the larger. So I think going back to Yamid's point, how do we go from the 10,000 to the multiple millions and eventually get to the point where people do have agency to use the money as they see fit? The last one that I will say kind of on the migration, we do have disaster risk programs as well across USAID, and that's definitely a tool that we have used. In the case of, Jamaica, for instance, we supported their last catastrophe bond. Across Africa, we do support Africa risk capacity. And so once again, really trying to work closely with the insurance sector to try and find ways to help insure, but also using predictive technologies to help provide cushion for people and communities that are affected by climate disasters.
Thank you so much. So unfortunately, I think we have run out of time. There are so many more questions that I have for all of you. We can show on the screen sort of what's up next at Alight, V. And again, wanted to thank the speakers, David, Jacqueline, Yamid, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise. It has been truly valuable. A few events that we have coming up. I'm actually speaking on a panel of a very similar topic, women and climate displacement, that's happening next week. We invite you to check out that event and join us there for Bold 2024. If any of you are in Minneapolis on Thursday, March 7th, we are organizing a Stand Up with Women comedy night with Alight, which should be a very fun event. So please join us for that. And then we will be doing the second in this series of webinars on Thursday, March 28th, celebrating the resilience of displaced women and girls. So that will be at a similar time in about a month from now. So thank you all for joining us. Please share your feedback. Please follow these great speakers on LinkedIn. Please follow Alight on our social media platforms. And we will be sharing a survey with you for some feedback.